You expected that facing your shadow would ignite clarity, power, even freedom, but instead what came was silence, heaviness, and the strange paralysis of having no motivation left. Why does truth feel like collapse? Why does awareness drain more energy than repression ever did? Why do you feel less alive after meeting the parts of yourself you worked so hard to avoid? For years, your drive was fueled by illusion. You pushed to prove yourself, to earn love, to outpace shame. You wore masks: hard worker, perfect partner, dutiful child, and each mask gave you purpose. But once you ripped them away, once you admitted your anger, your envy, your selfishness, your emptiness, what was left to strive for? Who are you without the masks that carried you? Jung warned, the shadow, once revealed, strips you bare. It dissolves false ambition. It robs you of the compulsions that once looked like purpose. And in that raw space, you find not inspiration, but vacancy. You no longer want what you used to want. You no longer believe in what once drove you. And until something deeper takes root, you drift. So the piercing questions arise: were you ever motivated by truth or only by fear? How much of your striving was born from repression, and how much collapsed once repression ended? And most urgently, will you interpret this emptiness as failure, or will you see it as initiation, the necessary silence before authentic desire can emerge? You live in a culture that worships drive, ambition, and productivity. From childhood, you were praised when you achieved, admired when you sacrificed, and validated when you proved your worth through effort. But beneath the applause, what truly fueled you? Was it freedom, or was it fear? Did you pursue success out of genuine desire, or out of terror that without it you would be unseen, unloved, abandoned? For years, repression was your hidden engine. You buried shame by striving harder. You silenced anger by becoming agreeable. You suppressed selfishness by performing generosity. Each act cost energy, but paradoxically, the cost created fuel. Illusion gave you a reason to run. You mistook compulsion for motivation. And because the world rewarded your masks, you never questioned them. How often did you tell yourself that exhaustion was noble? How often did you confuse survival strategies for passion? Then came the confrontation with your shadow. Suddenly, the false engines stalled. You saw that much of what you called love was people-pleasing. Much of what you called ambition was fear of worthlessness. Much of what you called kindness was avoidance of conflict. When these illusions cracked, so did your drive. How do you keep running when the track itself dissolves beneath you? Jung warned that facing the shadow does not bring immediate light. It brings collapse. What you thought was motivation was scaffolding built on repression. When repression falls, the scaffolding falls with it. You are left staring at bare ground. No roles to play, no compulsions to feed, no illusions to chase. Is it any wonder you feel emptied rather than energized? So the sharp questions press in. Will you rush back into illusion just to feel busy again? Will you call the silence failure, or will you recognize it as the fertile void where real desire can emerge? Will you keep measuring yourself by the standards of masks long discarded, or will you wait in the stillness until a truer voice rises? Because the truth is stark. After shadow work, there is no going back. The old fuel is gone. What remains is the long pause before authentic life begins. The collapse of motivation after shadow work is not random. It is rooted in the structures Carl Jung mapped across the psyche. Each concept he gave us explains why your drive once felt unstoppable and why it now feels extinguished. To understand your emptiness, you must trace how repression, projection, and false identity once fueled you, and why their removal leaves you disoriented. The persona, the mask that once drove you. The persona is the social mask you crafted to survive. For years, it was not just a role, it was your engine. You worked tirelessly to be the achiever, the loyal friend, the selfless partner. Each mask carried reward, applause, validation, belonging. But every mask also carried cost. You performed instead of living. Do you not see how much of your motivation was borrowed from these masks? When you removed them, you removed the very stage on which your drive played. Now you feel purposeless, not because life has no meaning, but because you are no longer acting in the script written by fear. How many times have you mistaken applause for passion? How many mornings did you rise, not out of joy, but out of terror, that without achievement you were nothing? The persona kept you moving, but at the cost of your soul. Once discarded, the emptiness is not failure, it is withdrawal from illusion. The shadow, the reservoir of suppressed energy. The shadow holds every impulse, desire, and anger you disowned. You believed selfishness, envy, rage, and lust were unworthy, so you buried them. But repression is never silent. It consumes energy to maintain. Strangely, that expenditure became fuel. You ran harder to deny what pressed against you from below. Now, after facing the shadow, that struggle ceases. Energy once spent suppressing returns, but instead of clarity, it leaves you with silence. You no longer have to prove, deny, or outrun. Yet without those battles, what remains? The void. Have you not noticed that when you finally admitted your anger, your drive to overperform collapsed? When you confessed your envy, your compulsion to compete dissolved. Facing the shadow strips away the artificial energy repression once gave. You are left with exhaustion because you are no longer burning the fuel of denial. Complexes, the wounds that powered ambition. Much of what you called motivation was wound-driven. The need to succeed was often the child's cry for approval. The need to serve was the abandoned child's attempt to earn love. The need to perfect was the shamed child's strategy to silence ridicule. These complexes acted like engines endlessly pushing you forward. But once you see them, once you name them as wounds, the compulsion weakens. You no longer want to run in circles to win approval, but without the wound, the drive collapses. How much of your so-called ambition was simply a child's survival strategy disguised as adult achievement? How many years did you labor under the belief that exhaustion was love, or perfection was safety? Once the complex dissolves, the drive it produced vanishes, and though freedom is real, it feels like emptiness. Projection, the borrowed energy of illusion. Projection gave you another hidden engine. You placed your denied traits onto others: authority, strength, creativity, dominance. Then you chased them, admired them, served them, resisted them. That dynamic gave you purpose. You lived to impress, compete with, or rescue them. But after shadow work, projections withdraw. You see others as human, no longer carriers of your disowned traits. Energy, once borrowed, collapses back into you, but without direction. You no longer idolize, no longer chase, no longer perform. And without those borrowed battles, motivation seems absent. Have you not noticed how the people who once fascinated you now leave you unmoved? How the relationships that once consumed you now feel hollow? Projection once fueled your striving. Its withdrawal leaves silence. The self, the slow, quiet alternative to drive. At the center of Jung's psychology lies the self, the wholeness you are called to embody. The self does not demand ambition, achievement, or constant proving. It asks for integration, balance, authenticity. But this is not fast fuel. It is slow, steady, quiet. Compared to the compulsions of persona shadow repression and wounded complexes, the self feels like stillness. After years of running on illusion, stillness feels like collapse. Do you not already sense that your lack of motivation is not death, but reorientation? That the absence of drive is the silence in which the self finally speaks? The trouble is not that you are broken, it is that you are learning to listen to a different kind of energy, one that will not erupt like compulsion, but will grow like seed. The structure of collapse. Taken together, Jung's concepts reveal a merciless truth. Your old motivation was never truly yours. It was persona seeking applause, shadow repression, burning fuel complexes, driving compulsion, projections animating false pursuits. Now that each has been stripped away, you are left with silence. This silence is not failure. It is the clearing after demolition. You cannot rebuild until the ruins are acknowledged. So the severe questions confront you. Will you rush back to the persona just to feel alive again? Will you resurrect your complexes just to taste old ambition? Will you project onto others just to regain the drama of pursuit? Or will you endure the vacancy, trusting that the self, though quiet, is preparing something deeper than illusion? Jung's insight is merciless but liberating. What collapses after shadow work is not life, but illusion. What feels like emptiness is space. And the question pressing on you now is simple but severe. Will you call this silence failure, or will you recognize it as the slow, steady beginning of a life finally rooted in truth? The emptiness you feel is not abstract. It shows up in the details of your life. Work, relationships, family, and even private ambitions all reveal the same pattern. What once drove you collapses after shadow work. You no longer find energy in roles that once consumed you. The truth is merciless. Your fuel was never freedom, it was repression. And when repression dies, the drive it fed dies with it. Work, the hollow office. You used to arrive at work with urgency. Every task felt like proof you were capable, worthy, indispensable. You volunteered for more, stayed late, sacrificed rest, all in the name of achievement. But now, after facing the shadow, you see through the script. You recognize that much of your ambition was fueled not by love of the work, but by fear of irrelevance, fear of being unseen, fear of disappointing. And with fear dissolved, the urgency vanishes. You stare at the same spreadsheets, the same deadlines, and feel nothing but fatigue. How many times have you told yourself, "I should care," only to realize the should was always the voice of persona, not self? How long will you keep pretending that your exhaustion is laziness, when in truth it is clarity, that the mask you wore no longer fits? Relationships. The end of pleasing. You once poured yourself into others. You were attentive, supportive, endlessly giving. You thrived on being the one who held everything together. But now, after shadow work, you see the cost. You see how much of your devotion was compulsion, born from guilt, fear of abandonment, or the need to feel indispensable. And when the illusion collapses, the drive to please collapses too. You no longer want to rescue, to fix, to perform. But what remains is unsettling silence. Who are you when you are not the one who gives endlessly? How many of your bonds depend not on mutual love, but on your exhaustion? Do you not already sense that the hollowness you feel in relationships is not absence of love, but absence of lies? Family, the broken script of approval. From childhood, you chased approval. You became the dutiful son or daughter, the one who did not complain, the one who made the family proud. Every achievement carried the secret hope that you would finally be enough. But after shadow work, that hope dies. You see that the approval was conditional, that your worth was never secured by sacrifice. And with this revelation, the drive to keep performing for family collapses. You no longer want to play the role of savior, peacemaker, or golden child. But then what? When you refuse the old script, silence fills its place. Do you not feel the strange paralysis of no longer running after their validation? And can you bear the emptiness until a new identity, one not rooted in performance, emerges? Friendships, the end of drama as fuel. With friends, you often lived through projection. You admired those who carried qualities you repressed: confidence, dominance, boldness. You gave to them, clung to them, envied them, and in return, you felt alive in their orbit. But now, the projections collapse. You see them not as gods or saviors, but as flawed equals. The drama dissolves, and without it, you feel distance. Friendships that once consumed your time feel flat. You no longer crave the roles you once played. But the silence is unnerving. Have you not wondered why you now avoid the very circles you once fought to belong to? How many of those bonds thrived only because your projections kept them alive? The private self, the collapse of personal ambition. Even in solitude, the pattern is clear. You once filled journals with goals, resolutions, lists of what you must accomplish to prove your worth. But after shadow work, the drive evaporates. You no longer want the degrees, the titles, the possessions that once seemed essential. They appear hollow, arbitrary. And without those desires, you drift. How do you plan a future when the future you chased dissolves? How do you define yourself when every goal feels like a mask you no longer wish to wear? The paralysis you feel is not failure, it is the space after false ambition dies. The pattern beneath them all. The details shift: work, love, family, friendship, ambition, but the structure is the same. Your energy was once borrowed from masks, wounds, projections, repression. Each collapse reveals the truth: you were never motivated by freedom, but by fear. Once fear loses its grip, the drive it powered dies. And so you sit in silence, not because life is meaningless, but because illusion is. So the piercing questions cut through: how many of your current efforts are still echoes of the old mask? How much of your exhaustion is not laziness, but clarity that you no longer want the false roles? How many of your relationships survive only because you play the giver, the pleaser, the achiever? And, most urgently, will you rush back into illusion just to feel busy again? Or will you endure the emptiness long enough for authentic desire to be born? Because Jung's insight is severe but liberating. Shadow work strips away the false engines. What remains is silence. That silence is not death, it is soil. The empath, the achiever, the pleaser all collapse. And in their ruins, the self waits. Your lack of motivation is not failure. It is the pause required for rebirth. The real question is whether you will interpret this emptiness as ruin or as the clearing in which wholeness can finally take root. Your collapse of motivation is not random, it follows a structure. Once you understand the machinery beneath it, you see why the silence after shadow work feels so heavy. Energy once borrowed from repression, guilt, and illusion no longer flows. Each layer of this mechanism once gave you false drive. Each now exposed leaves you still. Psychological repression as fuel repression. Repression is not passive, it is labor. You spent years silencing anger, burying shame, masking envy, suppressing selfishness. That suppression required constant vigilance. Every "I'm fine" when you were not, every smile hiding exhaustion, every apology when none was needed consumed energy. And paradoxically, the labor of repression generated drive. You worked harder to cover what you hid. But when shadow work exposed what was buried, repression lost its grip. With nothing left to conceal, the hidden engine stops. Do you not see that what you call laziness is often simply the absence of repression's fuel? How much of your former productivity was built on hiding, not living? Emotional guilt as compulsion. From childhood, you were trained to feel guilty for existing selfishly. That guilt drove you to serve, to comply, to excel. Every achievement soothed the whisper that you were not enough. Every act of sacrifice silenced the fear of being selfish. Guilt became gasoline. But shadow work dissolves this illusion, you see, that guilt was never truth, only training. And when guilt collapses, so does the compulsion it fueled. You no longer want to run for approval. Yet without that pressure, you feel empty. Can you endure the silence long enough to find desire free from guilt? Or will you rush back into guilt just to feel motivated again? Behavioral. The collapse of masks. Your persona, the dutiful worker, the perfect partner, the reliable friend, was more than role. It was energy. Playing those parts gave structure, applause, even adrenaline. But once you admit they were masks, the energy dies. You no longer want to perform, but without performance, you feel formless. How many of your daily habits were built not on love of life, but on the need to keep masks intact? And now, without those masks, do you not feel the terrifying freedom of having no script left to follow? Ethical, the end of false justifications. Much of your energy was sustained by justification. I must work harder because others depend on me. I must give more because they need me. I must stay because leaving would be cruel. Each justification was a leash binding you to exhaustion. But shadow work strips away excuses. You see the corruption beneath the ways you enabled dysfunction in the name of goodness. When the justifications fall, the leash snaps. You are no longer willing to betray yourself. Yet what fills the space where justification once stood? Without the illusion of duty, motivation collapses. Do you not feel the frightening vacancy where I must once lived? Existential, the encounter with futility. At the deepest level, shadow work confronts you with mortality, futility, the limits of achievement. You realize how much of your ambition was an attempt to outrun death, to escape insignificance, to pretend that proving yourself would make you immortal. But when you face the shadow honestly, you see that no achievement saves you, no approval erases mortality. And in that confrontation, striving collapses. You feel not passion, but paralysis. How many of your dreams were really defenses against death? How much of your energy was spent not in living, but in denying endings? And now that that denial is gone, can you bear the quiet truth that meaning cannot be manufactured, it must be lived? The interlocking cycle. These layers, repression, guilt, masks, justification, denial of death, formed a closed loop. Each fed the next. Repression fueled guilt. Guilt drove masks. Masks demanded justification. Justification denied futility. And the cycle kept you running. Shadow work breaks the loop. Each illusion collapses, leaving silence. You are not broken. You are simply no longer enslaved. The exhaustion you feel is not dysfunction, it is honesty. Do you not already sense that what feels like emptiness is simply life without lies? The severe choice. Now the piercing questions return. Will you mistake the silence for failure? Or will you see it as space for truth? Will you run back to guilt and masks for the false energy they provide? Or will you endure the vacancy until authentic desire grows? Will you resurrect the persona for applause? Or will you stand still until the self reveals its quiet call? Jung's warning is merciless. What you repress fuels you, but it enslaves you. What you expose empties you, but it frees you. Your lack of motivation is not a flaw. It is the cost of no longer being ruled by illusion. The only question that matters now is whether you will betray yourself by rushing back into masks, or whether you will endure the silence long enough for wholeness to take root. Because the truth is, severe after shadow work, emptiness is inevitable. The old engines are gone. What remains is stillness. And stillness, though it feels like collapse, is the first condition of authentic life. You now stand in the hollow after collapse, staring at the silence left behind when repression, guilt, and masks lose their grip. The temptation is to panic, to rush back into the old compulsions for the energy they provided. But if you do, you betray the work you have already endured. What feels like emptiness is not the end. It is the soil from which authentic life may grow. The task is to endure the vacancy without fleeing to shape new habits of being that honor truth rather than illusion. Observation, naming the false fuel. Begin by observing where your energy once came from. Did you work long hours because you loved the work, or because you feared being seen as lazy? Did you stay in relationships because they nourished you, or because you dreaded being called selfish if you left? Did you pursue achievement because it mattered to your soul, or because you were terrified of insignificance? Write it down. Map the false engines. Ask yourself daily, is this act born of love or fear, truth or mask? How much of my past motivation was compulsion disguised as virtue? How often did I call exhaustion passion when in truth it was desperation? Observation is not judgment, it is the first act of honesty. Boundaries, resisting the return to masks. When the silence grows unbearable, you will feel the pull to resume the old roles. To prove, to please, to strive. This is the test. You must resist the temptation to give energy where it does not belong. Say no when guilt presses you to yes. Decline when approval beckons you to perform. Protect time even when others call it selfish. The silence feels heavier at first, but each refusal strengthens you. Ask yourself, whose comfort am I betraying myself for? Who demands my labor, my attention, my compliance when my soul is asking for rest? And will I keep surrendering my wholeness to avoid their disapproval? Boundaries are the daily refusal to return to slavery. Shadow work, honoring the forbidden self. You collapsed because you spent years denying your shadow. Now you must honor it. Let yourself feel anger without apology. Let yourself rest without guilt. Let yourself desire without shame. This is not indulgence, it is integration. Each time you allow what was once forbidden, you reclaim energy that was trapped in repression. Sit with what rises. Do not flee the emptiness with distraction. Do you not already sense that beneath the silence is the voice of the self asking you to live more honestly? Ask yourself, what have I longed for but silenced? What have I condemned in myself that now demands to be lived? What fragments of desire still wait in the shadows untouched because I called them selfish? To honor them is not sin, it is survival. Reframing from collapse to gestation. The absence of motivation is not death, it is gestation. You are not broken, you are waiting. Seeds germinate in silence beneath the soil, invisible before they emerge. So it is with you. The false energy has died. Authentic energy has not yet arrived. You live in the in-between. This reframing is crucial. If you call the silence failure, you will flee back to masks. If you call it gestation, you will endure. Ask, what if this emptiness is not weakness but preparation? What if the loss of drive is the sign that false desire has finally died? What if stillness itself is the first step of rebirth? Your task is not to create immediate energy, but to wait faithfully for the slow, quiet rising of the self. Daily fidelity, one act rooted in truth. Grand goals are useless here. You cannot rebuild with the same compulsions that collapsed. Instead, practice fidelity one act each day rooted in truth, however small. Speak one honest word where you would have lied. Refuse one demand that drains you. Protect 1 hour of solitude fiercely. Do one task not for approval but because it nourishes your soul. These small acts accumulate. Over time, they rebuild energy, but this time the fuel is authentic. Each night, ask yourself, did I honor myself today, or did I betray myself? Did I act in truth, or did I relapse into mask? Did I live from freedom or from fear? This daily question is your compass. Relationships, testing bonds through truth. When you change, your relationships will change too. Some will accuse you of laziness, selfishness, or arrogance. Others will respect your boundaries even if they struggle at first. Do not fear this test. It is purification. Who collapses when you stop serving them was never bound to you by love, but by exploitation. Who grows stronger when you speak truth is your true ally. Ask yourself, who celebrates my wholeness and who resents it? Who grows with me when I refuse masks and who grows hostile? Will I keep clinging to those who only loved my erasure, or will I walk with those who honor my self-service? Giving without collapse. Your motivation need not vanish forever. It must be purified. Once bounded by truth, your empathy and drive become luminous. You can give without resentment, love without exhaustion, serve without collapse. But this requires discernment. Give only where your wholeness is respected. Contribute only when the act nourishes both you and others. Ask, where today can I give without losing myself? Where does my energy flow freely, not from compulsion, but from joy? Where does my presence heal rather than deplete? Service that costs you yourself is corruption. Service that flows from wholeness is sacred. The severe patience. Do not expect sudden fire. After shadow work, authentic energy grows slowly. You are being retrained, reformed. The silence you endure is the crucible. Ask yourself daily, will I betray this silence by running back into illusion? Or will I honor it, however heavy, trusting that life is being rebuilt in hidden places? Because the truth is severe. The absence of motivation is not proof of failure. It is the doorway into freedom. What feels like collapse is the end of slavery. What feels like vacancy is the first breath of authenticity. Your task now is not to ignite yourself with false fuel, but to wait faithfully for real fire to rise. And it will, but only if you do not run back to the old engines that once consumed you. You now see why your motivation collapsed after facing the shadow. The fuel that once drove you was never freedom. It was fear, guilt, repression, and the endless need to prove your worth. When that scaffolding crumbled, so did the false drive it sustained. The emptiness you feel is not proof of weakness. It is the silence left behind when illusions die. Jung warned that what you repress will enslave you, and what you integrate will set you free. You have stepped into the painful freedom of seeing clearly, but freedom at first feels like paralysis. So the severe questions confront you now. Will you betray your soul by running back into masks just to feel alive again? Will you resurrect compulsions that nearly consumed you simply because silence frightens you? Will you keep confusing activity with meaning? Or will you wait patiently for authentic desire to rise? Most urgently, will you call this emptiness failure, or will you recognize it as the threshold of rebirth? The path ahead is not glamorous. It is small, daily fidelity to truth, one refusal where you once obeyed, one boundary where you once erased yourself, one act of giving that flows from fullness rather than fear. These acts rebuild motivation slowly, but this time the fuel is real. Each day ask, did I honor myself, or did I betray myself? Did I act from truth or from compulsion? Did I keep faith with silence, or did I flee it? Because the choice is stark. Run back to illusion and regain false fire, or endure the stillness until authentic fire grows. The absence of motivation is not the end of you, it is the beginning. The question is whether you will trust the silence long enough to be remade. Today, resist the urge to fill the void with old lies. Choose one act rooted in truth. Protect one fragment of yourself. Guard the silence as sacred. For only then will motivation return, not as compulsion, but as authentic strength.